This is the story of a trip taken over 2 summers that started in Ketchikan and went all the way to Skagway. Since the first voyage, I've paddled 8,075 solo Alaskan miles and 22 more years in Alaska and British Columbia. But it is never enough. My boat now is a newer inflatable, longer, lower, and faster, with a rudder and a spray deck that sheds the rain and the seas. I have encountered 30 bears, 4 wolves, and hundreds of whales. We're still coexisting, and I keep learning. The philosophy is still the same. Go simple, go solo, go now. Every Alaskan has a bear story. Should I start with a true one of mine? Here it goes. The grizzly bear stood there, 5 feet away, his enormous head visible through the thin plastic sheet over the window in the old cabin door. He was turning the doorknob with his teeth. In a moment, he would burst through. Nah, I'll tell about it later. For now, I'll read to you excerpts from the book. This one is from the first chapter, when I was planning the trip. I asked for 2 months' time off from the job, leave without pay. I didn't need to get away. I needed to get to simplicity. I wanted to be lean and hard and sun-browned and kind. Instead, I felt fat and soft and white and mean. Years of a desk job in a bureaucracy can do that, even if you like the job. My request for the 2-month leave came back disapproved. I went home and looked at the 5-year plan on the wall. Paddle Alaska, number 1. I walked into the bathroom and looked at the familiar person in the mirror. Getting older, aren't you, lady? Better do the physical things now. You can work at a desk later. The next day, I handed in my resignation, effective in 2 months. Sometimes you have to go ahead and do the most important things, the things you believe in, and not wait until years later when you say, I wish I had gone, done, kissed. What we most regret are not the errors we made, but the things we didn't do. This excerpt is from Chapter 3 about an encounter with orcas in the Bem Canal. Again, I heard the big water sound, like the steam jets on a locomotive. 2 whales were moving north. More were coming. I stopped paddling, waiting. The critic had shamed the paddler into not fleeing. 1 whale lifted higher, and I could see the white undermarkings. Orca, the killer whale, unmistakably. A single one angled off from the pod toward me, dove, then surfaced 200 feet away. He blew once, a misty cloud, then dove again, leaving ruffles of white water on the surface. He rose again 100 feet away, still on course toward me, the spray from his blowhole and the dorsal fin both in a line, aimed like an arrow toward my boat. The fin was 5 feet high, firm and erect. A young male, I thought, a maverick, curious and unpredictable in the way of teenagers everywhere. I measured 200, 100. In quick motions, I dipped the paddle once on each side to make sure his sonar knew my precise location, then laid the paddle down and waited, camera to my eye, all heartbeat and adrenaline. A surge, the boat lifted. He surfaced across the bow 5 feet in front of the boat, lifted it with his own bow wave, brushed it in his arc, blew air and water. Was there an eye looking at me? I saw him only through the camera lens and pressed the shutter as the huge bulk rose and went down. I was gasping. The droplets on my arm were from his wet breath. I had a few worrying moments. This one was my most harrowing. It's a crossing to Strait Island in the Sumner Strait from Chapter 7. I paddle north and move west for an interminable hour. This isn't a green-blue sea, it's a gray-glue sea. Now I can see the maelstrom of 5-foot breaking surf on the reef to my left. A bell buoy is there, clanging wildly in the breakers. I cannot see the reef still underwater. The low tide, 3.3 feet, will not be until 9:17 tonight. I scarcely remember the statistics. The small gray book of the tide tables is in the chart bag between my knees. I cannot pause to study it or the chart, but I remember the symbol of a half-sunken wreck on the reef, its symbolic bow canted at a crazy angle. A diesel tug towing 2 huge barges is bearing down on me from the east. I glance quickly over my right shoulder. A man stands on the foredeck watching. At the last minute for them, 100 yards away, they veer to the south to avoid the reef. At least the implied offer of help was there, and I will thank them many times in all the days after. Now I tell myself what they were probably saying, damn fool, and again, damn fool, and you should have gone back while you still could, and you could die. Yes, I know. Strait Island is only a mile away now. Will I reach it, or will the reef claim me, capsizing the boat and tumbling us for a mile through the breakers, the rocks, and the icy water? Can I live through it? I think not. My pace is up to 60 strokes, my heartbeat doubled. A mass of kelp is south of the island. I see it ahead and paddle madly. 50 feet to the left, the surf crashes in white breaking seas 5 feet high. The boat slides into the kelp, a thick, ropey mass of stems and blades. Like a breakwater, it calms the seas and holds the boat steady. I grab it in my hands and pull the boat forward, paddle in a patch of clear water between the heavy fronds, pull again, paddle again, and come into quiet water on the lee side of the island. Gathered food was a big part of my experience. This slide shows sea asparagus, which I gathered for salads. I felt my trip was part Epicurean spoof of serious expeditions. This is from a passage in the 4th chapter. Here I made do with ingredients from the shore and in my food sack, then laid it all out on a red bandana placemat. First the hot, wet oshibori washcloth, then hot sake to sip, sushi rolled in black nori seaweed, miso soup, a mound of hot rice, a tempura assortment of fresh mussels, rehydrated mushrooms, and fukus seaweed, and finally smoked oysters from a can. There was even powdered and moistened wasabi for dipping the sushi. You had to be cautious with that if you wanted to keep the top of your head intact. There was a mug of tea and a sweetened black bean paste for dessert. I surveyed it all. I ran out to whittle chopsticks from spruce twigs. Next time, I'll bring a pack of hashi from Hawaii. Those dry white pine sticks would make fine kindling. After dinner, it was time for a bath, but there was no furo, no traditional Japanese bath to go with the dinner theme. Before commercial shower bags were available, I had combined the lining of a 5-liter wine box with a tube and a rubber sink faucet spray nozzle. It could be filled with hot water, placed inside the nylon bag I'd sewn at home, and hung shoulder high from a tree. The bag had a corner hole for Summit wine and a center hole for Franzia. I found on my paddles that a good campsite is worth looking for, but sometimes I found one by feel rather than through my eyes. This is from chapter 10. A mile toward Fortuna Strait, my campsite instinct grabbed the paddle. I landed and checked, and it was a 10-point place. There was a high-tide island to protect the landing from rough seas, a flat area for the tent, a fire pit, 2 nearby streams, neither big enough for salmon runs and bears, remains of a cabin that said someone else had also found it good, sunrise and sunset views, green grass, flowers, a beachcombing strand with a glass ball on it, and the final touch of a small sign lettered, "No animals but birds, no bears." On the overpopulated trails in the lower 48, an obvious campsite is an intrusion on the wilderness we seek, but here, with so much wild country, it can be a clean and friendly thing. Now, I'll tell you the bear story that I told in chapter 14. 3 days later, I would return from Ford's Terror, unpack and walk that trail to the stream. I had thoroughly established my scent on the path 4 days ago. Now, walking the trail, I sang loudly, "The bear went over the mountain, the bear." I stopped. There was a large bear pile on the path, precisely erasing my spot, thoroughly reestablishing her territory. 2:30 in the afternoon, I was having lunch, inside the cabin this time. The doorknob rattled and turned 5 feet from my table. I could see her head through the thin plastic sheet on the door, holding the knob in her teeth and turning it. I snatched the camera and took photos, talking all the while. "Really, this is too much. No, I'm not going to open the door and invite you in. Tomorrow I'll be leaving and the territory will be all yours again. Now go away." She turned and ambled off down the beach. I moved north along my route and the trip gradually came to an end. This is from the final chapter. The rain eased into a mist. The mountains were clear. Each needle, each scent, each pebble was sharp and singular. Across the inlet, a glacier spilled over a high ridge, its crevasses an electric blue. I recorked the bottle, mist and tears and wine dripping off my chin, then went back to the boat and paddled on. The wind had shifted. On this last mile, I would have a tailwind, a final gift from the sea. I rounded the last point. A warehouse was ahead, then a huge, bulky stern of a cruise ship. Only a few passengers were on deck in their raincoats, slouch hats, and plastic bonnets. They scarcely glanced down at my boat and its soggy 60-year-old paddler. Adventure was only relative. The ship was theirs. This boat was mine, and I would not trade. I slowed the stroke, savoring, and paddled on into the small boat harbor. Then, barely moving, I stroked around the cemented dock, past the moored skiffs, and glided to a stop at the foot of the shore ramp. I put the paddle up on the dock, then a knee, and rolled out. I unclipped the lifeline, used it to tie the boat to a cleat, and looked around, north toward the Arctic, up at the mountains. The first snow of winter was on the slopes. The alders were turning gold. The last flowers of the fireweed were at the top of the stalk. and the journey was over. I pulled out the half bottle, uncorked it, and looked down at the yellow boat. 85 days, 850 miles. I poured the last of the wine over the bow. Well done, small boat.